So, what are the values of language and cultural study and use? Solidarity, humility, self-reflection, thinking in new and non-stereotypical ways about those whose lives and languages are different from our own. These values are ones that you will hear thoroughly in the way that Christopher Howell, co-founder of the Pulsara Project, speaks to us today in this conversation. He talks about the employment, education, and impact components of the project, but especially he talks about the humanity behind language and culture fully expressed. Enjoy this podcast with my guest, Christopher Howell.
Welcome to episode 120 of It's About Language. Today, Nora Jones chats with Chris Howell, co-founder of the Pulsara Project. In 2009, Chris and friends set out to connect Central American artists and communities through handmade bracelets. What started small became a nationwide movement, impacting over 3,700 schools and creating jobs in Nicaragua and Guatemala. Join us for the inspiring story behind the Pulsara Project.
Chris, I'm delighted to welcome you to It's About Language and to be able to share with my listeners worldwide what you've been doing with the Pulsara Project. What I'd really appreciate your doing is telling folks that are listening about who you are, the Pulsara Project in general, and I have to say, from a language and culture point of view, I've got so many questions for you about the way that this project has unfolded to touch lives through language and culture. So let's let folks learn about you and about the project, please.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nora. So I'm Chris Howell. I'm one of the co-founders of the Pulsera Project. And the Pulsera Project is a nonprofit organization. We're a fair trade, nonprofit, service learning organization. So there's a lot of modifiers in there. But the very basic essentials of what we do is we partner with teachers, students, mostly through Spanish classes, and send what is essentially a fair trade service learning project in a box. It's totally free. What we do is we buy bracelets from artisans in Central America, and then partner with individual teachers to bring this very unique service learning project into schools. We started in 2009. Since then, we've worked with about 3,600 schools. We've done close to 8,000 school sales, and we've sold, or better put, students have sold over 1 million Pulseras, which has created over that many job hours of fair trade employment in Central America. And additionally, one of the things that's most crucial about our project and sort of how it evolved over the years is we originally started selling these bracelets because they were really cool. That was basically it. They were cool, handmade, very unique, very representative of the culture. And that was it. It was just a way to buy something and have it go back and benefit someone else in another country. But as I started really working, not just as a volunteer, but an employee for the Pulsera Project, we realized that there was this amazing connection that we weren't taking full advantage of between the person buying a Pulsera in the States and the artist that made that bracelet. So one of the things that's really cool about our project, every Pulsera is tagged with the photo and the signature of the artist that made it. And just in that simple act of buying a bracelet and seeing this is the person behind the product, we realized that was an excellent springboard towards opening people's mind and their sort of understanding of Central America, Central American culture, and the social issues that we're trying to address by hosting these sales and essentially buying a bracelet. That creates that first sort of connection.
Thank you. And you use the word there, addressing very social issues. So expand on that then. This could be just kids selling stuff, and so many of the listeners probably have folks in their family where they've been buying various products from kiddos in order to raise money. And in this case, it happens to be connected to Central America, but that social issues aspect. Tell us more.
Yeah, so when we first started working with artisans in Central America, a lot of people in Central America have needs, right? It's the same thing as the United States, anywhere else in the world. And we sort of intentionally, due to the nature of our organization, we want to work with the people who have the most limited economic opportunities. So just to think of some specific examples, we partner now with a bunch of groups in Guatemala that do all sorts of different things, ranging from we partner with a feminist radio cooperative, and they do a lot of really essential work in educating young women and girls in rural Guatemala about their rights as people, what they should, what sort of treatment they should tolerate and not tolerate. Sort of teaching girls and women to stand up for themselves, to be independent, to develop a lot of these skills that in some cultures can be a little bit more gendered. So that's one example. Another example is we used to work with a cooperative in northern Nicaragua that most of the people there, the only jobs that were available in their community were cutting sugarcane, which is extremely physically demanding. It is linked to chronic kidney disease that they can't actually diagnose what's causing it. So for many of our artisans for a long time, if they weren't cutting sugarcane, they didn't have a job. And what we did was we taught them how to make pulseras, and they could, in some cases, not have to worry about hurting their kidneys anymore by making pulseras and having a little bit more of a relaxed pace. But we don't exclusively just work with marginalized people. It's really any group that has similar values to us. So another example, we work with a permaculture collective in Guatemala. And they are in a very nice spot on Lago Atitlan. It's a very beautiful, beautiful space. But they are doing really amazing work to develop regional capacity and sort of rescue and preserve a lot of these ancestral harvesting practices that their Mayan ancestors have used that now they're sort of keeping alive and passing on to the next generation. So really, when we talk about our social issues, we work anywhere where we see issues or anywhere where we think that we can make a connection and work with people who are really capable. And that's, I think, one of the big factors too, is we don't just look for people who are sob stories, but they're actually extremely inspiring people that have a lot of good things to share with people. And sort of in line with that idea of connecting students with artists, that's what we want to do, is we want to connect students with like the coolest people we get to meet in Central America.
Well, that's a great segue to my next question, which is, you have spoken about, say, having a tag with a picture of a person so that they know that there's a real human being behind this particular pulsera. And by the way, for those who are not Spanish speakers of my listeners, pulsera is the word in Spanish for bracelet. It goes around the area of your pulse if you happen to be an English speaker. And we have then the students seeing this picture, but it sounds like you have much more of a connection for the students and presumably for their teacher than this simple acknowledgement. You have a lot of connection you've described already that you have. How do you bring that more to the experience of the students and teachers? What ways?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, we want people to participate however much they want to be involved. If they just want to buy a bracelet and they look at the picture of the person and they say, that's great, that's fine with us. But we have two main resources that sort of go above and beyond that. The first is an artisan website that basically has profiles of, I believe now we're up to over 200 of the artisans. Every artist has a page. It shows what sort of pulseras they make, a brief interview, an audio interview, video, greeting, map showing where they live, basically everything we can do to give students of all language proficiencies a sense of these are the people that you're working with, that you're partnering with. And that has been super crucial and is sort of like a very easy way to sort of get beyond just that picture on the bracelet. But then in addition to that, we have a ton of educational resources, and they are all based on the lives of the artists we work with. So in addition to those other resources, we have more in-depth videos that look at, for example, our partners that look at that permaculture organization and the women's, the feminist radio station, because we want students to really get a sense of who these people are, what the issues are that they're confronting, and how are they going about it in this really unique way. And that's something that I think really comes across well, and why we create a ton of videos and all these materials, because students can not just see the person, in some cases see where they live, actually essentially walk a day in their shoes, but understand where they're coming from. What issues do they confront in their life, and how are they using their own skill set to overcome them? We think that we very much see that aspect of the project as a two-way street. So students really do have a lot to learn from the artists, and obviously the artists benefit by these Pulsera cells as well.
Nice connection there. Can you tell us some stories of experiences that students and potentially their teachers have had with regard to what they have learned and making these connections, and some of the impact on students' lives and choices?
Yeah, so we're so fortunate to have had the chance to work with so many schools. And one of the nice things about being, it's 2024 now, so this is the Pulsara Project's 15th year of existence. And we're working with schools. Schools are signing up right now, some of whom we've worked with for 10 years or 11 years or 12 years. And to create those sort of connections and partnerships with teachers that they want to do it year after year is, one, very encouraging to us. It allows us to continue to expand our mission and our programs. But it also is something that is really borne out by continued student interest. Just this morning, I received an email from a teacher signing up for another sale who said, we weren't even thinking about doing a sale this year, but my students really wanted to do it. And that's to me and to us, that's like one of the best signs that we're doing something well. I had the privilege in November when I was in Chicago of actually visiting with a school that's done 11 Pulsera sales, Lyons Township High School. And they go all out every year. They have T-shirts. It's a school-wide project. And just having a chance to meet with some of these students and sort of see how, for them, the connections are coming alive, and they buy into it. They don't just sell the bracelets, but get local businesses involved, get their local artists in the class involved in the promotion of the sale. If somebody is involved with the morning announcements, creating fun little videos. And that's one of the real privileges we have, is seeing how students will take this project and just make it their own. One of the best signs that our program is good is we'll have students who did the Pulsera Project in middle school or high school are now Spanish teachers and are excited to bring that back into their classroom. Or students who go off to college and bring it to college with them. And what we hear, consistently from teachers, and one of the main reasons that I wanted to start developing educational programs, is that I feel like all too often in language education, at least when I was growing up, it was the stress was more on the cultural thing. We would learn about Spain. We would learn about the running of the bulls. We would learn about these cultural events, but not so much the people. and how language learning opens you up to this whole new club of individuals that you can all of a sudden interact with and relate to. And that was the aha, light bulb moment for me as a language learner that made me really want to learn Spanish. So to be able to show kids that this matters, learning another language is not just about, checking a box for your college application, but it can change the way you see the world. And these people change the way that we see the world. And so we're just so excited to share that. And students really react well to that.
It sounds like they do, and that they bring some powerful understandings. And you mentioned in some of the materials that you have provided for me ahead of time and in our conversations that we've had, and that I have for our listeners on my website, fluency.consulting, that along with the three main components that differentiate it from other service learning organizations, and you've mentioned here the employment of those in this case, Central America, education that has become clear in your conversation here, and the impact on lives, and I hope you'll speak more about that as well, that you also have some key values that are underlying what you're doing. So these three wonderful components have as a foundation as well some values. What are those values? How do you see those playing out in what you're doing, in what the educators are doing, in what the students are doing, and potentially in the impact on the larger community?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's funny. When we talk about the three main components, the tres componentes is what we call them: impact, education, and employment. And that's always how we've explained the project to other people. The four values you're referring to actually originally were just things that we learned that we wanted to carry with us as we moved through developing this nonprofit. As I mentioned, none of us had a business plan that we were going to create a national nonprofit organization. It was very much grassroots, very much one blind step to the next. And as we were making that progress, we learned a lot of things about how service learning, how we kind of approached that wrong, how other people can not necessarily approach it wrong, but just can be limited by certain things. So one of our main values is self-awareness. And when we say self-awareness, and these are all values that, again, were mostly like guiding posts for us, but eventually we realized actually this might help other people too. But being aware of how our own biases, our own preconceived ideas about another country or a people can actually hinder our capacity to connect with people. If you see someone and you say, "Oh, this person's Guatemalan, they're poor," you're already putting a bunch of values onto that. And we try to be really self-aware so that we're bringing as little of that to the table as possible, and also aware of how our own actions impact other people. Another core value is solidarity. And that one is really more easy to understand, and it kind of goes hand in hand with self-awareness. We see our partnership with any of the artists, the leaders we work with, it is 100% a 50-50 horizontal relationship. And that is really important for us. And same thing with the partnership for the students. We want the students to think you're not just helping someone else out, but you're also getting something in return through this education. And then we really, as we were spending time down there, realizing that we had preconceptions about poverty. We had this idea of, in our country, we think of poverty as an economic metric. You're rich, you have a lot of money, you're poor, you don't have a lot of money. And one thing that we learned is that there's different levels, there's different metrics that you can base poverty on. There's community poverty. There's a poverty of the spirit that even in these economically impoverished communities, people don't have that. People are very connected. They have this very full sense of family, sense of community. And so to sort of push back on the idea that we're just helping out poor people, let's think about the different ways in which we are well off and also poor. And that helps destigmatize that as well. And, through all of that runs this really important strain of humility. I think that captures everything that we do. It is kind of, in some ways, a selfish act to say, I'm going to go into the world and change it. I'm going to make it different. I'm going to make it better. And when that becomes all about the person who's doing the change, you can really lose your way, because we're not doing this for ourselves. We're trying to make the world better through partnership, through collaboration, through mutualism. And the more humility that everyone brings to the table in that, the better off you're going to be. So that's sort of what we, in a nutshell, humility, self-awareness, solidarity, and thinking about poverty differently. That informs not only how we develop our educational resources, but everything that we do within the project as well.
You mentioned that it's found those 4 wonderful values that you've just described are foundational to how you have done your work. But you've also, if I understand correctly, have said that you kind of lifted the curtain a little bit, made sure that those are things that the participants also see. And if so, do you hope that through experience and potentially labeling what has been experienced with these values, that they are understood? Or do you have ways in which you are proactively helping participants to understand that these values exist, that they are underlying what you're doing, and that they are worthy of emulation in their lives and how to go about it?
One of the hard parts about what we do is that there's already a very strong, good, developed ethic in our country about service, and international service in particular. There's lots of people go on mission trips. Lots of people go abroad to do something, or they'll work locally to have a global impact. And we didn't want, even though we ourselves had sort of walked our meandering walk, making errors, making pit stops, tripping and falling and stumbling every once in a while, and to not come across as, we are above you, because we're not. We are just people who have made some mistakes, and we would like other people to learn from the mistakes that we've made. And hopefully, if there's other organizations out there that can help us avoid some of the mistakes they've made, we can keep doing that. Because that really is what it's about. It's not about criticizing that impulse for service, or about criticizing the fact that people do want the world to be better. Obviously, that's what we want too. That's why we do this work. But to recognize that intention, the intent of doing good, is not enough. That was one of the hardest, most bitter pills we had to swallow, is that even though we might have the best of intentions and we have all these resources, all this knowledge we can bring to bear, if you don't really work diligently, you can make mistakes, and you can essentially misallocate funds and misallocate where you're focusing. Just a quick example of that. When we were first working in Central America, we worked primarily with a very, again, economically marginalized population, and we had a very clear sense of what they needed. We were really trying to give them just more and more money, essentially. We figured if their wages are good enough, they'll be able to save and have the sort of economic mobility that we value so much in the United States, for good reason, because people want to be able to create a better life for their children. And what we learned was that no matter how much we gave them a bonus, our artisans, or what the actual numbers were, because of how much need there is and the way that communities are structured in Nicaragua, if somebody has an extra $150 one month, they're not going to set it aside because they have family members or friends or people in their community that need that urgently. And while that urgent need it's good that people can address that, our goal again is creating some sort of economic uplift. And after we talked to a bunch of the artists and really developed a program where we could understand what are your needs according to you in your own terms, not according to our values, what are your needs? And that led to the creation of our housing program. Because a lot of people in Central America do not have a clean title to their house if they own it. If they rent, they don't have any clear provisions that sort of keep them in their place. If their landlord wants to evict them, they can do that. So we partnered with a law firm and a few different construction groups to obtain clean titles, give people the land and the material resources if needed so that they could build a sturdy home. And that really, for a lot of those people, fundamentally changed the way that their life worked. Because if you have a solid roof over your head and 4 solid walls, that's a really big step. And you know that no one's going to come to evict you at any point in time. That provides a lot of security. So that's just like one example of how our preconceived notions really didn't really pay off. And it wasn't until we had those conversations that we really benefited from that knowledge.
Wow, what an impressive story. And here you are listening with that humility, listening to how to think about what the needs are. We got the word poverty there in that initial value, but just the needs are articulated. This has been an interesting road that you have developed then. You've talked about falling and picking yourselves up, discovering these pathways. How have you and the team that you work with helped others to understand what the project is about through the lens of how you've come about learning these things and the obviously grown impact that you have on people's lives? What do you do to share some of these pathways to those who may be considering this kind of concept, but also don't know where to start and could use this kind of vision and heads up and support?
Yeah. So we've always, and our main sort of mechanism for that is our first and foremost, just publishing. These are the values that inform our project, and we've written about them. They underline all of the educational resources we have. But in our Color the World video, which is just a 10-minute video about the Pulsara Project, our mission, what it is that we do, that is the space where we really, I think, do the most to be very upfront that, we started this project with certain ideas and learned quickly, but not perfectly, that we needed to really change our approach. And we're constantly, as we say in the video, just that idea of constantly challenging your assumptions, constantly challenging the work that you're doing, that enables you to do better. Because even if you spend 10, 20 hours deciding if you want to change the displays, for example, like we send these big displays to every school, and every year we spend time thinking about if we can replace or change them. Every year we decide not to because they work really well, but we have to have that conversation every year because that's what allows us to do a better project. There might be a year where it actually will make sense to change things up. So it's really about conveying to anyone else that wants to do something like this, like the Pulsara Project, that you have to communicate. You have to be drawing as much from the people that you're trying to help and work with in every aspect, every stakeholder, because everybody involved in a nonprofit entity is a stakeholder. What the students want in the U.S., what the teachers want, what the artisans want, these are all things that we have to like consider, and you can't consider them if you don't talk, if you don't open up that dialogue process. So that's really something we stress with all of our sales. And when we do class talks or whatever, I'm always sort of relating one or two anecdotes of our foibles and follies from the past that I think help people relate and understand that we're not, coming down from on high saying that we have all the answers, because we don't. We just have some really good practices that help make that process of finding the answers a little bit more straightforward.
That's fantastic that you do indeed share it. I'm thinking about the people that you have met, the artisans in particular here, I'm looking for. Do you have a story of one or more individuals that have inspired you in their work, in their attitude, and in their connection to you through the Pulsara Project and to students through the project as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost hard to think of one specific example and not immediately be flooded with a million different ideas. But one example would be the permaculture cooperative that I was talking about, and not just them, but another group we worked with up in La Hermandad in Nicaragua. They also were a farming cooperative, and to just to sit down with someone who lives in a completely different part of the world, has on paper maybe a high school education, and then to hear them talk about their environment, their farm, the wildlife around them, even the wildlife that has no pertinence to their economic activities, but to just have such wisdom and experience and expertise is truly humbling. When we say humility was one of our values, it's not that that's what we were looking for, although it is always good to be humble. But when you encounter someone, like Sebastian from La Hermandad, or Jonathan from EMOP, or Ines from EMOP, they are just so knowledgeable and wise, and it really challenges those like bedrock assumptions you have about what is education. What is knowing your community. These people have a sense that transcends the human and transcends to this spiritual level almost. And I think that's really inspiring. We work with a lot of women, indigenous women, women that come from very rough backgrounds that I, as a man, can't even really relate to. But again, seeing their perseverance and the fact that for them, it's their obstacles that they to be overcome rather than these massive roadblocks in their lives. And that sort of attitude is just so inspiring. And then as well, we work with a lot of people, in Guatemala, there's a huge push, especially among young people, to come to the United States or emigrate, go elsewhere. And we are, while we support people's, right to seek a better life for themselves, we think that it's better if people can do that in their own community. So really working with a lot of people who maybe our one friend, Willie, he came to the United States, lived for over a decade, and now lives back in his hometown in Guatemala and tries to discourage people from going abroad and to build more roots, to build a better community where they are. And that's something that, again, with all of the economic pressures that are pushing people out of the country, pushing people afield, to see these people and the work that they're taking upon themselves to build, restore, enhance that sense of community it's extremely humbling and exciting to see too as well.
Inspiring. Thank you for sharing those quick stories that have so much humanity behind them, Chris. Appreciate that. And one of the things that I said near the beginning of the podcast was that if we're not careful in our discussions, sometimes when we see, say, businesses at exhibits and conferences and so forth, we may see just a superficial type of experience, and that the listeners would discover that this was far more than colored, wonderful, beautiful bracelets. And you've spoken so articulately about these various issues and about the growth of the impact. Help the listeners to understand your personal background, your trajectory in life that leads you to this being where you are right now, and some of the things that you continue to plan to do, and potentially with some of the other employees, team members, I almost want to keep calling them here, of Pulsera do. But really, let's start with you. What makes Chris Howell like this, wanting these kinds of stories and results to come forward?
Well, it's funny you asked that, because I was just visiting a really good friend who I went to college with, and we both one of the first things we did in our time with the Pulsara Project was we made a documentary about the Pulsara Project. My buddy Tom LaFay, who is a amazing photojournalist, he lives in Bogota, Colombia. He's actually battling testicular cancer right now. But I just visited him, and we were talking a lot about college, about sort of, we'd watch these documentaries, and we had this very clear sense that we wanted to go and do something in the world to make it better, and to educate people, because we were learning all this new stuff, and we wanted to share that as well. And it was really just a coincidence. One of my very good friends, him and his family were going to Nicaragua on this trip. They needed someone who spoke Spanish better than them. I barely fit the bill. I barely qualified on that score, and I managed to go down. And it really was with a truly, I would say, very youthful sense of just, I want to make the world better. Getting outside of my bubble, the bubble that I grew up in. I studied abroad in Cuba with my friend Tom in 2009, and that really, because it was not only a different language, but a totally different political culture and economic culture. And that really opened my eyes, and I said, okay, there's a whole big world out there, and I want to see as much of it as I can, and hopefully help some people too. And so when I was invited on that Nicaragua trip the first time, it was really just, hey, this is, these bracelets are fun and they're cool. Nothing was with the long-term vision of, I'm going to do this after school. I'm after college, this is going to be my career. It was just, this is really fun. We were going down to Nicaragua. We were spending a lot of time with these young people. It was really engaging and fun. And as I got closer to the end of college and started contemplating what I wanted to do with my life, I realized that this was the ideal forum for that, really, because we had, it was a blank canvas. The Pulsara Project had worked with 69 schools at that point, and I think it was like 13 states. Maybe it was more than that, but I still remember vividly that Colin, my friend, and I, who started working right out of college, we put a big map on the wall with all 50 states, and we colored in the ones that had hosted sales, and we wanted to get to all 50 states. And when you jump cut to 2024, and all of a sudden we are working in all 50 states. We've worked with 3,600 schools, and we're hoping to work with around 1,000 schools this year. How we got from A to B, in that 15 years has been a long, long process. And it's, again, certainly has not been straightforward. COVID really disrupted things. We've had some political, economic situations in Central America that have disrupted things. But throughout all of it, it was this clear sense that we can actually do something to help some people. It might not be, it's not about changing the world. It's just, this is something that I believe in so fully, that it's really hard to imagine doing anything else. And that's because much of the values we've developed have really informed how I see my life in general. So yeah, a big part of, my identity is tied up in this work, and And that's because I've developed it. I've grown up through working for this project in many ways.
When you think of your new little son, how old is your son now?
He will be 10 months tomorrow.
10 months tomorrow. Fantastic. Congratulations again to your new family member. And when you look at him and you think about how you want to talk with him, about how he finds these pathways into the world, what are some of the pieces of advice, or what are some of the things that you want to demonstrate and explain to him so we can personalize a little bit what you are demonstrating and explaining also to the world at large? When you look at him, how are you going to let him know what's important?
When am I going to take him to Guatemala for the first time, or to Nicaragua for the first time? And I thought for a while that it wouldn't be until he was, old enough to appreciate it, whatever that, like 10, 15 years old. But the more that I think about it, the more I wish I had been exposed to a lot of these people that I've met through the Pulsara Project earlier in life. I think that's one of the things, and one of the reasons I believe so fully in what we do, is that every time I have a conversation with these artisans, or I just, share a coffee or have some food with them, there is a truly refreshing insight from their unique perspective. You see a lot of people in whatever community you live in. It's limited by, who you're around and the ideas that are conveyed there. But then when you step into another country and you step into a world where the realities are just so different, there's a lot of opportunity to learn and to challenge again. You can't really challenge the air around you, the water. You can't change the water you swim in, or challenge the thinking, the thought processes you have, until you step outside of them. So that's something I really want to encourage with Conrad is, getting outside of your comfort zone is something that we always, one of the old Pulsara Project mottos was learn how to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think that's another thing that is just, it's really important. It's increasingly important in today's world, where we are, thanks to technology, aware of so much of the bad things that are going on in the world, and the good things. And that's double-edged, because on the one hand, you have this awareness, you can learn more, ideally do more. But in a lot of cases, there isn't that clear call to action. There isn't a clear way that you can actually make a difference. And so that's really important. It's another thing that I like about what we do, is that even though it's a small slice of the pie, it's a very clear call to action. This is what you can do that will, change things in a small way.
Indeed, it is. Thank you, Chris. Now, what are some of the things about the project, or encouragements to individuals or to groups for the future? Where are you headed with the Pulsara Project, and what are some of the things that you would love people to know about and to take action on in their own lives, if at all possible? Combine those two, please.
Yeah. So one of the things that we're really excited about, actually, is once again acknowledging that we messed up and we made an error. In 2022, as we were recovering from COVID, dealing with a move to new countries in Central America where the standard of living is higher, we took a look at things and we decided that we were going to raise our prices. Pulseras have always been $5, which is a great deal. We always thought it was a great deal. And we raised them to $7, because honestly, $7 is still a pretty good deal for some of these bracelets, especially being fair trade and all the other things we do. And after a year and a half of that, based on feedback from teachers, from students, from just seeing how the sales were going, we realized that we were selling fewer Pulseras. And to us, that was a really big no-no. Like I said earlier, we have three main programs: education, employment, and impact. And education and employment are basically tied together in Pulsera sales. One student buys a Pulsera, that's a Pulsera they've bought from an artisan. They've learned something. The artist has received an economic benefit. So it's kind of like a win-win-win. And we decided early this year that we wanted to change the prices back to $5 and to keep them at $5 moving forward because of accessibility. We heard from a lot of teachers who would sell 200, 250, maybe even just 100 Pulseras a school, which for us is totally fine because we want to work with every type of school. We work with a lot of Title I schools. They're not going to sell 500 Pulseras, but they might sell 100 or 75. And at $7, a lot of these schools were selling even less than that. And we just kind of took a really hard look at ourselves and said, do we want this project? What is this project about? What's the spirit of the Pulsara project? And accessibility has always been one of the biggest things. So by returning to the $5 price, we should be able to employ about twice as many people. We should be able to educate about twice as many people because they'll be participating in the sales on this in the US. And how it affects our bottom line is we'll have a little bit less as a percentage for those impact investments. But in our experience, giving people good jobs and providing them with the support that we create through the housing program, through the different programs I've outlined, that's the best thing that we do. It's the best thing we can do. And it's already, I think we work with about 210 artisans as of right now, but that number could go up. And, the actual number of people that are part of families where there's a Pulsera maker earning income, the actual impact of that education or employment sector of the project is over 1,000 people. It's a huge, huge part of what we do. So we're really excited about changing that back once again with a lot of humility because we thought it was going to work at $7 and it just wasn't as fun. So we've made the readjustments and we're really excited to work with new and returning schools because $5 is it's nice and easy. There's a $5 bill. You can buy 4 for $20. You can, do the math, counting the returns really easily. So we're excited about that. And we're really hoping that by lowering the prices that we'll be able to work with even more schools and just partner with as many people as possible.
And watch what unfolds from that. And that's a real act of humility right there. And it's neat to be able to hear in your voice the excitement of making that change back and watching the energy rise back up. That's really neat, Chris. What about this project, about the nature of the project in general, more generalized if you wish, do you want to make sure that you have said to the listeners before we end today, what would you like to make sure they hear again? Or what do you feel that they have not yet heard or should really remember for their own lives based on our conversation today and what you hope for them?
Good question. I think one of the things that I learned actually exhibiting at a conference with a former teacher who's on our board and a really, dear friend, obviously, of the Pulsara Project, she was explaining to other teachers that this project can be as much or as little as teachers want it to be. We work with a lot of teachers that every year it's the fun bracelet project, it's colorful, and that's it. And then some teachers incorporate some of the lessons into their class. Some teachers will have us talk to their students. We'll have our other teammates talk to their students and really dive deep. But the project works sort of a la carte, how people want. And that's one of the things I think is one of our strengths. In addition to the project being free, really easy to sign up for, and the fact that we just make it as easy as possible for teachers because teachers are busy, and we really do try to take all of the guesswork, all of the complicated paperwork and everything else out of their hands so we can sort of focus on the fun stuff.
That's great. And that's a real marker for people that may be interested in doing good in the world and understanding how you kind of grease the rails, as it were, to make sure that things are easy for those that would like to help on the way to making a big difference in the world. Well, Chris Howell, thank you so much for describing the Pulsara Project in detail, your experience with it, the background, and the wonderful impact, mutual impact, on all of those that are participating from an educational and economic and world life impact point of view. Appreciate your sharing all of that today with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It's always great talking to you, and we're grateful for the opportunity.
Glad to have you. Thank you, Chris, and take care. Thanks for listening to this podcast with my guest, Christopher Howell. I hope that you too have had a chance to reflect on the solidarity, humility, self-reflection, and non-stereotypical thinking that is part of your experience of language and culture. Please do check out my website, fluency.consulting, for more information about Christopher and about the Pulsara Project. And I wish you well in all the projects of your life based on language and cultural understanding. Until next time.